Welcome back, puppies, to Bandits Part 3. Now, his tunic was originally painted a different color. I tried a different color scheme. It was kind of a pea green color. It was kind of a yellow green. It's actually not a bad shade of green, but it just didn't work with this miniature. And before I painted the others, I painted it on him. I didn't like the way it looked, so I went back and painted over with some fantasy game colors, or fantasy games from Scale Color. It was Despair Green. And here I have a little bit of the Tonic Gray mixed in with the Despair Green to create a highlight. And I'm just coming back and highlighting it. Because of the other color that was under the Despair Green, when I went over it, the Despair Green came out a lot darker and didn't have the shading, because I couldn't use as thin of a layer to get the other color concealed, covered up good. But I went ahead and included this in the video because I think it's important to see that, sometimes color scheme doesn't work out, we just paint over it. And then to compensate, sometimes we have to do our highlights a little different. If you can hear a humming in the background, that's probably a space heater. My back room here, where I have the little studio set up and I do my gaming, is not tied into the central heat and air for the rest of the house, so I have to run a space heater back here. And it's pretty cold outside at night. So here what you see me doing is using some model color from Vallejo, some German gray. I'm using that for the cloak on this guy and for the cowls, and gambison on some of the other miniatures. And again, it's a pretty thin down version of the German gray from Model Color, from Vallejo's model color line, and I just thin it with tap water and a wet palette. So most of the highlights you see there are natural. They're just from me using a really thin layer of that German gray, and that's some of the zenithal primer that's producing some of the highlights you see there on his cloak, coming through the thin layer of paint. Now here on the gambison, I already have it painted, and I actually am going back and highlighting it up to bring up the German gray, which is almost a black. It's a very dark gray. Not quite a charcoal gray, but pretty close to it. To lighten it up a little bit, I just use some Scale Color Tonic Gray. And again, I'm just using that as a highlight. Sorry for the out of focus there on the miniature. It seems the camera focused on the mat in the background. Here we go, coming into focus now. I really love the gambisons on these on the miniatures from Redbox Games, where they have gambisons like this. In this particular group that you'll see me painting for this series, this character is the only one, or this miniature is the only one with the gambison. I really like the way the gambisons look. They're fun to paint. Okay, so now I am going back and doing a highlight on this guy like I did on the gambison for the other character. And again, it's just mixing in a little bit of the gray, the Tonic Gray with the German gray. And it's just to even out the highlights and bring them up a little more. And here I'm actually showing the paints that I used. Some Tonic Gray. think I'm actually getting ready here to do actually another layer of highlights, and so I'm actually going to be mixing a little bit more of the Mistotonic Gray in with the German Gray. And here I'm actually demonstrating how I mix it up on my wet palette. And you can see all those beads of water, so when I talk about mixing just regular tap water in, that's just how I do it. Now on his, the Zenithal primer really worked really well, but I had some overpaint areas, and so that's one of the nice things about coming back in and kind of manually doing the highlights, if you will, and actually, you know, bringing it up to a lighter color so I can paint over some of the overpaint areas. He had some of that despair green got on his cowl from when I was doing his tunic. Yeah, I know it looks a little funny because the footage is sped up 200 times. But what you saw there for a brief moment was I was just examining the miniature, seeing where else did I need to highlight, were there any areas that I missed. Because you don't really, the way that character's hunched over, you don't want to highlight too much of that inner chest area. Same thing with this guy, you want to be careful, you don't want to get too many highlights down there underneath his chin. That lower, or I should say upper chest area. And here you see me working on this guy's face, and I'm trying to add some color to his face. I end up knocking that down a bit with some flesh tone later. But I think I'm going to go back in and probably bring it up a little bit more, some of that red. And what I'm doing there is I just have, it's actually a color called Purple Heat from Secret Weapon Miniatures. And I just water it down real good, again in the wet palette with just little beads of like tap water. And thin it out that way. So it's a very thin glaze. Well, bark on, puppies. Please like, share, and subscribe.